You unlock your phone for just a second. One scroll becomes 10. 10 becomes 30. And before you even realize what happened, your brain had been dragged through hundreds of different realities, emotions, headlines, faces, sounds, and impulses. And that right there is the real problem. Not the phone itself, not even social media by itself, the scrolling. Because every single swipe forces your brain to abandon one context and instantly adapt to another, and another, and another. And the circuits in the brain responsible for deep focus, sustained attention, and cognitive stability get interrupted over and over again, all day long. Think about what that means. Every time your attention jumps from one thing to the next, you are literally training your brain to stop staying with anything for very long. You are conditioning yourself for distraction. And the scary part, most people don't even realize it's happening. Now look, I use social media. You use social media. This isn't some anti-technology rant, but the scroll function itself is a rehearsal for fragmented attention. It's practice, repetition, conditioning, and the human brain is unbelievably adaptable. Your brain is essentially a map of your experiences. Certain systems are hardwired. Your heartbeat, your breathing, immune functions. But a massive portion of the brain is open territory, open real estate. And what gets built there depends on how you use it. That's the part people miss. The brain is constantly reallocating resources based on behavior. So when you repeatedly train rapid context switching, fast novelty seeking, endless sensory rotation, the brain adapts to that, but adaptation always comes with a cost. Because neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, is not magic. Every strengthening of one circuit happens at the expense of another potential function. You cannot optimize every mode of thinking simultaneously. So if you spend hours every day swiping, switching tabs, bouncing between notifications, jumping from screen to screen, your brain becomes exceptionally good at fragmentation, but maybe worse at depth. And this is why understanding the mechanism matters so much. People love checklists. Give me the top 10 habits. Tell me how to focus. Tell me how to sleep better. Fine. You can print the list, tape it to your refrigerator, put it beside your bed. But if information alone changed behavior, everyone would already be disciplined. The reason people struggle isn't because they lack information. It's because the way information is learned and consumed directly shapes whether it gets applied. And this is where things get really interesting. Your ability to focus right now, in this exact moment, is heavily influenced by the sensory input you consumed in the previous hours, even the previous days. That means your focus session doesn't begin when you sit down to work. It begins long before that. If the moments before work were overstimulating, scrolling, notifications, rapid dopamine hits, endless novelty, there's a very good chance your brain will resist entering deep focus afterward, which is why one of the most underrated productivity tools in existence is something almost nobody wants anymore: boredom. I'm a huge advocate for boring breaks, silence before work, silence after work. And here's why that matters. Let's say you're trying to learn something difficult. Read a book, build a skill, solve a problem, create something meaningful. Neuroplasticity requires alertness and focus. Yes, Sleep later that night matters too. Absolutely. But another crucial piece is reflection, not stimulation. Reflection. Walking to your car after learning something. Sitting quietly after a conversation. Thinking about a podcast you heard earlier. Revisiting ideas mentally without immediately drowning them in new sensory input. That reflection process dramatically strengthens memory formation and understanding, and yet modern life destroys it. The second we finish one experience, we flood ourselves with another, then another, then another. We never let the mind consolidate, and the research on learning makes this brutally clear. People think learning is repetition. It's not. Learning is recall. Researchers found that rereading material over and over is far less effective than reading once and then testing yourself later, trying to remember, struggling and retrieve the information, because all learning is anti-forgetting. That's what learning really is. Repeated recall beats repeated exposure, and once you understand that, everything changes. Even reflection without perfect memory helps. Even wrestling mentally with an idea strengthens the neural circuitry around it. Now here's where the conversation goes even deeper. What exactly are thoughts? Seriously, think about that. For years, neuroscientists understood sensation. We understand sight, sound, smell, touch, physical stimuli entering the nervous system and becoming electrical and chemical signals. We understand perception, which sensations you pay attention to. We understand emotions, behaviors, memories, but thoughts themselves, what are they? And neuroscientist Jenny Grow offers one of the most fascinating explanations. She proposes that thoughts begin with a seed, a word, an object, a memory, an idea. Like this. Someone says, think of a dog. Instantly your brain starts building. Maybe it's a golden retriever, then a red bandana around its neck, then fluffy fur, then texture, then movement, then memories. Thoughts are essentially layers of sensory associations stacking on top of one another in abstract mental space. That means thinking itself depends on controlling sensory input. Read that again. Your ability to think clearly is constrained by how many competing sensory experiences are flooding your system at once. And now look at modern phones. We have compressed an effectively infinite stream of sensory novelty into a 6-inch screen. Your physical world became smaller, but your cognitive world became infinite. That's why your mind feels crowded, even when you're sitting alone. Your attention is still fighting thousands of unresolved sensory fragments. And this explains something almost everybody has experienced. You sit down to read and realize 5 pages later, you absorb nothing. Why? Because your brain was still processing the sensory residue from before you even opened the book. The brain doesn't switch instantly. It carries momentum, which is why throughout history, people instinctively created systems to narrow attention. There are old photographs of children struggling to focus, wearing helmets with narrow eye slits, so they couldn't look around the room. Extreme. Absolutely. But the principle was correct. Reduce sensory competition. Even now, some schools in China experiment with having students stare at a fixed point before beginning work, intentionally stabilizing attention before cognitive effort begins. Sounds intense, maybe even excessive, but the underlying idea matters. before deep work, reduced stimulation. Personally, before writing, podcasting, or doing cognitively demanding work, I try to make myself as bored as possible. No constant input, no random stimulation, no unnecessary noise. I even created physical no phone zones in my environment because I realized something terrifying. Even if you're sitting in an empty room, if your brain is overloaded from previous stimulation, focus becomes incredibly difficult. And honestly, I'm amazed anyone can focus at all anymore. I don't think every person suddenly developed ADHD. I think we underestimated what endless sensory fragmentation does to the brain. And once you understand how thoughts are constructed, layer upon layer of sensory residue, suddenly everything makes sense. Now here's where it gets even more disturbing. The systems driving social media were heavily influenced by casino psychology. The Comfort Crisis author Michael Easter explained that slot machines used to generate only a small percentage of casino revenue. Then someone noticed how kids played video games for hours, chasing novelty. So casinos redesigned slot machines around endless, unpredictable novelty loops, near infinite combinations, constant stimulation, continuous anticipation, and people would keep playing even while losing, because the brain interpreted novelty itself as reward. Sound familiar? That's the scroll. The brain gets tricked into believing it's progressing, winning, discovering, even when it's just consuming randomness. And look, social media absolutely contains value. I teach on it. I consume it. I've met incredible people through it. I've learned things that genuinely changed my life. But if you need to write a book, build a business, master craft, solve difficult problems, create meaningful work, you have to protect your attention like your future depends on it, because it does. And here's the beautiful part. Most people never discover. Once you actually enter deep focus, the brain starts locking in. It's like a ball rolling across a flat surface that suddenly drops into a deep groove. Once you fall into concentrated work, it becomes easier to stay there. You felt this before. You start writing reluctantly, then suddenly 2 hours disappear. You begin studying, then your brain fully engages. You enter flow, but most people interrupt the process before it fully forms. Notification, text message, quick scroll, tiny dopamine hit, and the groove resets. This is why modern distraction is so destructive. We've sabotaged our own ability to think deeply. But there's also incredible opportunity hidden inside this. As David Goggins would say, it's now surprisingly easy to become exceptional. Why? Because so few people can focus anymore. If you can resist constant distraction, if you can sit with boredom, if you can protect uninterrupted thought, if you can stay locked into meaningful work while everyone else is fragmenting their attention, you immediately separate yourself from the crowd, massively. And I think years from now, humanity is going to look back at this era with shock. People already regret how much time they spend on their phones after just 1 week. Imagine multiplying that across decades. I would be stunned if "I wish I spent less time on my phone" doesn't become one of the most common regrets people have at the end of their lives, because we can already feel it happening right now. And maybe eventually we'll develop healthier ways to integrate technology into human life. Maybe we'll learn balance. Maybe future systems become more ethical. But right now, we're living through the equivalent of the early cigarette era. At first, nobody understood the long-term consequences. And what makes this especially dangerous is that phone use often isn't even addiction in the traditional sense. It's compulsion. An obsession is mental. A compulsion is behavioral. And compulsions don't actually resolve the discomfort. They intensify it, like scratching an itch that only grows worse afterward. That's what compulsive scrolling feels like. And yet buried inside the internet are occasional rewards, insights, discoveries, meaningful connections, powerful ideas, just enough to keep people searching endlessly for the next gem. That's the hook, the variable reward. Sometimes you genuinely discover something incredible, an idea, a person, a breakthrough insight, a conversation that changes your perspective, and that possibility keeps people coming back. But going forward, whether we're talking about children or adults, creators or consumers, students or entrepreneurs, success will increasingly belong to the people who develop the strongest ability to control their own attention. Because attention is no longer just productivity. Attention is identity. Attention is memory. Attention is thought itself. And in a world fighting to capture your mind every second of every day, the ability to deliberately direct your focus may become the single most valuable skill a human being can possess. Subscribe to the channel and give a like if you enjoyed this video.